Awesome. So our next speaker is Joe from Spotify themselves. So, hey, Joe, how are you? You hear me?
Yep, being off mute helps. So,
Awesome.
hey everyone.
Yeah. So,
Um,
asking Joe to come. It's great to have Spotify here. Kind of they were able to start this community and start this project, and I'm really excited about some of the commercial things that you're doing with the Spotify, actually becoming a B2B company in a way. So that's really exciting, and I look forward to hearing more about that.
yeah, great. Cool. So yeah, like I said, my name is Joe Combopiano. I'm a sales engineer here at Spotify. I mostly focus on Backstage's commercialization efforts that we have going on. I've absolutely loved being a part of these sessions that we've had going on today because it's been really, really motivating to see the impact that Backstage has had on this adoption community and things like that. So I'm excited to talk to you all today. My presentation is going to be a mixture of a couple of things. So let me flip slide. So first I'm going to talk about just briefly the history of Backstage, some impact it's had internally from our own usage, as well as community usage. Then I'm going to give you all kind of a demo of the plugins that we have currently rolled out in our bundle, talk a little bit about the future state and things like that, and then just open it up to any questions. So I was really excited to see Soundcheck called out earlier today during the Twilio session. So we can go a bit deeper on the questions that you all had around that as well once we get to that point. So let's get started. Cool. So kind of brief history graph lesson that I wanted to share about Backstage is that in 2014, Spotify was in hypergrowth mode. We were hiring an incredible amount of engineers, but noticed that the time for an engineer to actually become productive was drastically ballooning based on the size and scale of the systems that we had. So originally we called Backstage System Z, and it was born to allow engineers to help us solve common dev challenges, improve the developer experience, and make developers effective faster. So obviously since then we've done a lot. We open sourced it in 2020, donated it to the CNCF, became part of the CNCF incubator in 2022. And we most recently launched our commercialization efforts that we're going to be talking about a bit more. So that's what the bundle is. So to give kind of an overview of the growth of the Backstage community, we now have over 2 million end users, 2,000 adopters, 1,000 contributors, over 4,000 forks, 9,000 members of our Discord for the community, which is a great resource to join if you're not a part of that already. And over 21,000 stars on GitHub. So this kind of like emphasizes the growth that we've had in the community over a short period of time since we've open sourced it in 2020. So here's some stats we have from our internal Backstage usage as well, kind of amplifying the impact that we've had with it. So we're 2.3 more active on GitHub. So we're a lot more active when we're using Backstage. We create twice as much code as we did previously, with 17% less cycle time. We deploy software twice as fast, and the software deployed lasts 3 times as long, which kind of shows that we're a lot faster, a lot more agile, but also we're building quality software that lasts. And we also have a lot better retention with Backstage in place. We found that people that are able to discover the things they need to do their job well, like doing their job, and want to stay at Spotify. Here's kind of a growth chart that shows what adoption looks like. And you can notice that this started in July of 2020 when we open sourced it, and where we are today. So obviously this kind of cuts off in May, but it keeps going exponentially. So we've seen a drastic increase in adopters of Backstage over time, which has helped us, one, like enable and improve Backstage because we have a huge community behind it now and everyone is helping make it better. But internally at Spotify, we've also had a huge amount of growth with our Backstage usage. So when I was making these slides, I went and looked into our internal Backstage catalog and just pulled some numbers out to show you all. So we have 42,142 components alone in our Backstage environment. We have 227 internal plugins that we've built, and we have a 99% organic adoption rate. So 99% of the people inside of Spotify use Backstage on a regular basis. But the 227 plugins is which I'll go into a bit deeper on, because we've had a lot of internal success with our plugins. So we were talking a bit about Soundcheck earlier. Soundcheck is an internal plugin that we use at Spotify. It's one of the ones we've commercialized as well, but we've had a lot of impact with Spotify with Soundcheck ourselves. So we've had a lot of productivity boosts by using it. So we have seven more deployments per active production component. 20% decrease in master build branch failures. We save over 5 hours in resolution of high urgency incidents. We've had 46% decrease in time waiting for PR and builds, 56% decrease in time for local builds, and the mobile developer satisfaction has gone from 50% to 75% in over a year. So this is just one of the internal plugins that we've built along our journey from coming from System Z till now. Another one we have is Skill Exchange, and Skill Exchange is our internal collaboration platform that we use for on-the-job learning, innovation, and finding ways to stretch your career. So this is kind of the tool that we use internally to figure out how we want to grow our careers in different ways. So we have learning paths and things like that that allow people to understand ways they can grow their skill set. So if I'm a web developer, I can learn back-end development and find people that can help me and collaborate on new projects that will help me gain that skill set. So with that, we've seen people that are just using it to learn are 15% less likely to leave the company after 1 year. So that's a pretty powerful stat that I'll talk about, because I'm going to talk about that in each of these different ones. So then the other part is the embedders, and embedders are short-term engagements that we have at Spotify, where you can basically try out a different team. You can try out a completely different type of skill set and kind of learn where you want to grow your career through it. And what you'll notice is that people that are taking advantage of that within Skill Exchange are 62% less likely to leave after 1 year. We also have hackathons and hackers as part of the Skill Exchange platform. And this is where people can post ideas they have for projects. And they can also just jump in and collaborate on different hackathon events that we have. So good examples of those are, if you use Spotify, Discover Weekly was actually a hack project that came out of the Skill Exchange platform. And the year-end Wrapped is actually another one that came out of this platform as well. And the year-end Wrapped, we actually fill that team each year by utilizing the embedders program within Skill Exchange. And you'll notice that even with this one, 14% less likely to leave the company after 1 year. So I won't bore you with all these different stats, but I think they're really powerful and definitely take a look. I'll also note that we have just posted some blog posts on these. So we have a blog post on our website around the Skill Exchange stats that you see here. So if you want to dig in deeper and understand how we measured those, and likewise for this Soundcheck one as well. So why are we trying to commercialize different things? We kind of have a hypothesis that we wanted to go over with everyone. So here's kind of the rundown of how you use Backstage today. You have your Backstage portal, you have your internal developer team that's building it, and then you have the strength of the community behind it that's constantly making improvements to helping you with your developer velocity by making changes in plugins that are readily available for you. But we've been building this internally for almost 9 years now. So our hypothesis behind commercialization is that with the 200 something plugins we have internally, oops, I clicked the wrong button. There we go. What if we brought Spotify's best plugin developers and built plugins or commercialized plugins that we have internally and have seen success with externally to you all? And thus, the Backstage, Spotify for Backstage bundle was born. So the first iteration of the bundle that we have today consists of 5 different plugins. RBAC, which is our no-code UI for access control management of permissions in the permissioning framework. Soundcheck, which is obviously going to be a framework for measuring the health of tech components. We have codified checks to streamline this code development. We'll talk a lot more about that one, obviously. Skill Exchange, which is that internal marketplace that we were describing for collaboration. I just showed you some stats behind that. Pulse, which is our internal survey tool that we use to measure the effectiveness and happiness of our developers once a quarter to kind of get a pulse of where we are. And then Insights, which is going to be our analytics tool for tracking Backstage adoption. We have some tried and tested dashboards that we use to put some impact measurement behind Backstage usage, and then we've rolled them out into dashboards that we think will be useful for anyone to look at. Cool. So I'm gonna be the one person that decides to do a live demo, and hopefully it goes well for you all. So now I'm gonna switch over to do a demo and share my screen. Am I good to go on your all end? I'm gonna assume that's a yes. Cool. Can I just get a raise of hands if you can all, or a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Perfect. Cool. So here's a demo of Backstage environment that I just wanted to share with you all to kind of give you just a brief overview of what our plugins look like. So inside of here, I have all the different plugins that we have installed. I'll just go through them in an order that I feel is necessary. So talking about insights, insights is how we're going to be able to measure the impact of our Backstage adoption journey. So within this environment, you'll be able to understand how frequently your users are actually coming in and engaging with Backstage, what plugins they're frequenting, and how often they're looking at them on a typical day, to kind of get an understanding of where you can put goals behind active users and usage of these different plugins and things like that. You can also use this user view to understand who are your power users behind Backstage. So which teams are the ones that are constantly and frequenting it, and what teams maybe aren't. So you could basically do user interviews with both of these teams to get an understanding of how and why they're using Backstage and what needs to be improved to make it better for them. Another view I'll show you quickly inside of this, because I'm going to run over these quickly, is the search view. And I think this is a really powerful view when it comes to Backstage, especially when you're early on in your adoption journey, because this will show you what people's user intent is behind going to Backstage. So if they're searching for something, it'll show up in here and you'll be able to understand what are the most frequently searched queries inside of Backstage. A good example is like golden paths, and golden paths are our best practices that we have at Spotify for backend and web development and things like that. But you'll notice people are constantly searching for it in this environment, but I don't really have anything related to that in my navigation or my homepage for user experience. So this could be a signal to me in the UX team that maybe I need to adjust my navigation to make it easier for people to discover the things that they're frequenting. So just make Backstage that much stickier. Now I've heard a lot of people talk about templates today as well. So another view we have is kind of the impact of the templates that we use to scaffold different projects. So based on the golden paths that we have specific templates internally at Spotify. So this will show you how often these are executed and run on any given day. This will kind of give you a signal of like how much resources are needed behind each of these different templates that you have to make sure that they're maintained and kept up to date and things like that. And it'll also give you an understanding of which ones maybe are ready to be deprecated because they're not actually being used that frequently and things like that. So then I'll go over and just show you what Skill Exchange looks like as well, because we were talking about that a bit. Inside of Skill Exchange, like I mentioned, a collaboration tool, you'll be able to find people that can help you with whatever kind of project you're looking for. So if I was looking for someone to help me with web development, I can use this tool to search for people and understand based on their skill profile, who has experience with these different things that I'm looking at, so that I can find people to be like, hey, I'm working on a new project. I'm looking for help on web development. Do you mind pair programming with me? Likewise, we have the embeds, which are going to be those job listings that we have for short-term kind of stretch opportunities. We have the mentorship view, which will just show you who's offering to mentor in different areas and who's looking for mentors. We noticed at Spotify that if we kind of mandate someone become a mentor to someone else, it doesn't work as organically as when we let people kind of have autonomy in their career and discover who they want to work with to help them grow their career. So it's helped in a lot of different ways. And then finally, the hacks, which are going to be the ideas that people will just come up with and put down onto Skill Exchange as like new project ideas that we can have to understand like what we can work on in the future when we have free time or have a week for innovation. We also have hackathons as part of that, where we'll group all these different hack ideas into a specific event so that we can kind of resource teams to work on projects in a much more organized manner. Pulse, like I mentioned, is going to give you survey results and surveys to all of your engineers to kind of measure the impact of all the initiatives you have going on within Backstage or just your engineering org in general. So within Pulse, you'll be able to understand the signals over time of what's happening within your organization. So in this demo environment, clearly something happened 2023 Q1 that drastically impacted productivity. We break it down into different measurement items, so different categories to basically help understand based on the different questions we have, to kind of give signals and figure out where we can take action to make things better for our organization. RBAC, which is going to be our no-code UI. This is going to be how you can utilize the permissions framework, make updates and create roles and policies for different teams for Backstage usage to kind of tailor the experience to the different teams you have at your organization. We find that a lot of companies want to use something like this, especially if they're government related, bank related, healthcare related, things like that. It's kind of table stakes to have that data separation in ways that make sense for their organizations. The other nice benefit of this compared to just the open source permissions framework is that you don't need to worry about tearing down and spinning up your Backstage environment. These will just be appended in real time where you can create changes to your environment. So to just kind of give you an overview of what this looks like, you can define what the roles are within your system. You can select the groups that'll be part of your product catalog and or different users for those specific ones. Then you can select different permissions that are available. So these are all the permissions we have in our permissioning framework. And then we can set rules around allowing, denying, or doing it conditionally as well. And the last one I'll talk about is sound check, because sound check is probably the one that a lot of people are talking about, especially like you mentioned, they were talking about with Twilio earlier today. So sound check is kind of how we measure the impact of all of our different software components. And we basically put around checks and compliance through security, our golden paths and things like that. So let me just pull up a sample of sound check. So here's a specific website we have called the Q proxy. Inside of here, you'll be able to see the different tracks that we have enabled for the specific type of component. And it'll be broken down into the different checks that we have enabled for test certification, for instance, then other ones for golden state, and then other things like the backend service version upgrade track. So these are the different tracks we have enabled for this specific one. And the way sound check is kind of broken down is into checks, which are going to be those conditional Boolean statements, tracks, which are going to be a collection of different checks that you have kind of grouped together with a specific focus in mind. And then we have the collectors, which is how we actually organize the data, the different data points that we're bringing into sound check. So we have fact collectors for GitHub, the software catalog itself, which Twilio is heavily utilizing. We have ones for source code management, so you can actually tap into your source code. This works across all of the major different source code management tools that we have. And then you also have the ability to build your own custom fact collectors, which will retrieve data from whatever systems you need it to come from in order to create checks. Good examples of that are like a lot of organizations want PagerDuty to be utilized and understand, make sure that's set up and organized for the different components. So a lot of people will build a custom fact collector for something like that. Now, one of the newest features we have for SoundCheck is going to be this tech health dashboard. And this is really impactful because it'll show you how you're actually performing over time with all of the different sound checks that you have in place. So for instance, if I wanted to search and understand how is the test certified track doing, I could look at this view and understand, okay, over time, across all of the different teams and components that we have, we're now reaching a 95% pass rate. So this will allow you to kind of set initiatives in place with SoundCheck as the data point behind it to make sure that you're able to measure that impact. With this view, you can also check things like only specific checks as well. So if I wanted to look at checks here, I could understand each of these different individual checks to understand what's the trend going on with each of these as well. To understand, maybe I have a specific check and there's a vulnerability in place with the version of Log4j that I'm using. So I have a SoundCheck check for the version of Log4j, and I want to make sure that everyone's abiding by the updated version such that no one is susceptible to this new vulnerability that came out. You could basically use this as your visualization behind that. You'll also be able to understand teams over time and their performance too. So this will give you visibility and trends around each of the different teams within your Backstage org that own components. How are they performing over time with the different sound checks and tracks? Cool. So kind of the quick overview I wanted to give of our different plugins. I'm going to get back to my presentation now. I'm going to ask for another thumbs up. Can you all see the presentation again where it says demo? Yep, cool. Cool. So we have some other things on our radar. So we're currently working on some other plugins, and we're actually experimenting with some more internal plugins. So we have one that's going to be that we're talking about right now for experimentation. So basically being able to have experimentation flags and things like that as a plugin available inside of Backstage. We're also working on another plugin for managing and viewing data sets and data endpoints. So we noticed that a lot of people have to do some customization when it comes to managing data sets within Backstage currently. So we're going to build out some plugins that will really help with that as well. We also have another one around cost insights that we're thinking about. So being able to not just visualize the cost insights and how much you're spending on your cloud cost per different components, but actually making recommendations based on our understanding of these different systems to how you can better utilize the cost spend of these different things. And then the last thing is kind of automating software maintenance. So we internally have a plugin that we use for doing large scale refactors across all of like 10,000 different repositories at once. So in that example I mentioned earlier with Log4j with that vulnerability, we could use our internal plugin to actually automate a change that will go across all of our different repos all at once. So these are the ones that we're considering releasing next. And I think they're all really exciting. So, but I also want to just kind of give you all a pep talk as well, because I've seen a lot of people building their own custom plugins today. And that's really motivating to me, but like, I want you all to be motivated to kind of replicate our success too. So if you all are creating your own plugins, we highly recommend sharing them and building them into our marketplace. So for instance, I see Zalando's that Levi was talking about earlier today is one of the ones we have inside of here. But just if you have ones that you think are successful and you have success stories behind them, we highly encourage you to work through adding them to a marketplace in whatever way works for you as well. So like I mentioned with the other plugins, that was kind of just a sneak preview overview of what they are. But actually next Thursday, we have our roadmap webinar. So anyone that's interested in learning more about our roadmap and what's to come, we highly encourage you to join that and learn more. Cool. So that's going to be it for me, but open it up to any questions that you all have now.
Awesome, thank you. We have a lot of questions, so try to get through as many as we can. So back to looking at the documentation aspect that you talked about, does Spotify use Backstage for documentation in general at Spotify? Is Backstage your de facto documentation place for documentation, or do you have a lot of documentation that exists outside of Backstage?
Yeah, so Backstage is our de facto documentation when it comes to anything related to our different software components and even our different teams. For instance, I'm part of that team I mentioned earlier. My team name is the Imaginary Goats, which is like, we have weird team names at Spotify. Our documentation about how to contribute to our team, what our values are, what we build, what components we own, all lives within Backstage. And the way I think about Backstage for us is it's the looking glass into all of our different infrastructure and projects that we have going on at the company. So whenever I'm looking to incorporate anything into a specific project, for instance, just last month I was looking at potentially adding the Backstage's documentation into our developer.spotify.com project. But I had no idea who owned it, where the code lived, or anything related to it, and how to contribute to that project. I was able to just search it within the Backstage search plugin, find the different components as a part of it, look at the tech docs behind it to understand how I could go about contributing it, and who the owners of that project were to reach out to them to like figure out, does it make sense for Backstage to add its commercial plugin documentation to that website or to build our own and things like that.
Got it.
So short answer is yes. When it comes to building things like proposals for projects and things like that, we don't do that necessarily within Backstage itself. However, we do have actually templates. So we even scaffold our what we call RFCs, utilizing Backstage to create those Google Doc templates for project proposals.
And can I ask a question about why that is? Is that because I'm interested? Is that because that the actual collaboration and commenting in Google Docs is superior to what the Git workflow?
For sure. So yeah, Spotify is a very documentation forward company, and everything gets a lot of buy-in and a lot of collaboration before we actually go through any sort of implementation phase. And Google Docs just helps us kind of do that a lot more effectively than kind of the read-only tech docs aspect of it. Especially because when it comes to doing things like that, it's not necessarily just engineers or product managers. There's a lot of different people that will contribute. So putting a pull request on tech docs and README files isn't going to be the most efficient way to get that feedback fast.
Awesome. I see a couple questions here kind of related to this, so let me see if I can kind of merge them. People are interested in the, I'm interested as well, both the RBAC plugin and some of the stuff you're showing in SoundCheck has how are you importing organization data and then also associating service ownership with that org data and keeping that up to date? What are the options for integrating that on the back end?
Yeah. So we have a lot of different integrations with a lot of org data providers. So if you look at the Backstage.io documentation, there's a lot of different integrations we have in place. So like things like Azure AD, we have an integration in place that'll allow you to ingest your org data that way. We have integrations with LDAP as well, so you can just quickly do that as well. So there's a lot of different ways, and I encourage you to look at the documentation behind that. I can send a link afterwards or send you like helpful links afterwards that will articulate that a bit better for you. That when it comes to service ownership, we generally do it via catalog YAML files. So we round up all of our GitHub repositories and things like that and have synchronizations in place between GitHub and our Backstage environment, where we call out the team that has ownership over those specific items. And we also actually have our own internal plugin for managing teams and kind of like the entire provisioning of different projects and access to different tools called Band Manager. And Band Manager is kind of like shows you what the de facto teams are that we utilize when we're creating these projects. And the nice thing is with the templates we've built out, team ownership is one of like the drop downs. So it's not something that we really have to worry about kind of keeping in sync. It's all part of the process of building out these new projects. Everything is set up in place with the best practices and like uniform cataloging set up in place already.
Got it. So
non-answered answer to some of those, but yeah, kind of helpful for a lot of the stuff.
So there's a couple of other questions here related to Backstage and how much investment you put in, how much investment Spotify puts in Backstage. So can you talk a little bit about, like, given the success of Backstage and how it's like kind of hyper growth, how has the investment in the Backstage platform changed within Spotify? And then in general, like how many developers inside Spotify work on open source Backstage?
That is a good question. So I can tell you that the investment is large in Backstage. Like we are firm believers that Spotify is delivering valuable commercial software. So there is investment where we're hiring across a bunch of different roles and things like that when it comes to keep building out these plugins and figuring out ways to commercialize some of the internal ones that we have. So as far as the open source team goes, I don't know exactly the number of people that contribute to the open source project. Mm-hmm. I can say that the different plugins that we've rolled out so far as in our commercial bundle are our internal teams that maintain both an internal version of Backstage and these external commercialized plugins as well. So each one of these different plugins that we've rolled out has a team behind it. So at least probably, I don't know the exact numbers behind each of these teams, but they all have their own engineering teams behind them that will keep investing and building out these different plugins. And likewise for the other ones that we're considering rolling out in the future, they have teams behind them as well. So there's a lot of investment in our internal tooling that we're also merging into being available for commercial software as well.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions. I really appreciate your time, Joe. Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. All right, so now we have a 15-minute break, so we'll meet back here at 1:45.